Hi everybody. Today we're going to do some slightly more advanced stuff with SpriteKit that I think will add a little bit of needed sophistication to what you are making. And so I'm going to show you a couple of things that I think you might find useful as you think about what you might make with SpriteKit in the coming days. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to do what I always do, and that is create some sprite nodes. But what I'm going to do as a starting point is this is just the blank SpriteKit template that you can download from PowerSchool Learning. And so it has a whole bunch of functions in here that I've given you just to kind of clean things up and have a starting point. So this is where I'm starting today. It's not a blank playground. But I'm going to start by adding some code that I wrote for you already. I'm going to create something called a score bubble. I'm making it a circle. And you'll notice I get a bunch of errors, which we'll fix in just a second. You'll notice the first error is this circle size. I'm going to make a constant for my game called circle size, and I'm going to make it a CG float, and I'm going to set it equal to 40.0 points. So a couple of these errors will disappear, and so this should actually show our new game. Very exciting. That's all it's supposed to do right there. That's it. So that's great. The next thing that I want to do is, let's say that I want this bubble to have text in it. Now normally the way we would do this is we would create a label node. And so I'll just try giving it a score. So I'll create a label node and just paste some code in there. I'll put some text in there. It has an 8. You might say, oh, Weinberg, you forgot the famous add child. So I'm going to do that. And I'm going to add score bubble label to this. So you can see down here it's actually positioning my text in the bottom right-hand corner. That's because the default position is 0, 0. So it's doing exactly what I want it to do. But if you think about this, if I want this circle to kind of have a bubble with a score in it, what I'd like to do is really attach that score so that it attach that score to this bubble itself. So the idea behind this is I would like to attach this score bubble label to the score bubble itself. And so there's kind of a cool thing that I can do to this. Instead of adding this to self, what I can do is I can actually add score bubble label as a child to score bubble. And so you might say at this point, where is that label? If you look very carefully, and I don't even know if the video is going to be able to capture this, but it does have an 8 in there. Let's change the font color so that it is visible. There we go. Next thing, let's play with the size of this a little bit. And let's say that we want this to be 1.5 times whatever the radius of our circle is. So that makes it a little bit bigger to match the circle. Just really quickly, you'll notice if I change this to 20 up here for circle size, that's now matching the size of the circle. I like that 40, so let's keep it there. Now, I know that this is screaming out to some of you, the fact that that 8 really isn't centered on the circle. There's one other thing that I just want to mention, and that is, notice that we haven't set the position of this font as well. So there are two ways that we can think about this. The first thing that I'm going to share with you is that you can set the position of one SpriteKit node relative to another. So I'm going to set the position to 0, 0. And so this is showing you that the 8 is located at the default of 0, 0. We also have one other way that we can position this, and that is that all text has another property that is called vertical alignment mode, and that lets you say where kind of you want to measure the position of the text from. And so I want to measure the position of the text from the center. So now the 0 position of this text label is in the center of the box that kind of bounds the 8. And the other thing to note is that by setting the position at 0, 0, I'm setting the position of that 8 at the center of the score bubble. So we say that the score bubble label is a child of score bubble, and score bubble is a child of the entire scene. So now, at this point, we have created a piece of text that will move around with its parent circle. So you can imagine this bouncing up and down, and maybe having a whole bunch of these on the screen. Now this is all fine and good, but you might be thinking to yourself, this is a really boring game. Is it possible to add more of these? Now, of course, one thing I could do right now is take all of this code and paste it again, and you're going to get a bunch of errors because these are all referring to things that already exist in the game. Because score bubble exists, and so I could go through and make score bubble 1, score bubble 1, score bubble 1, score bubble 1, and just go all the way through, and eventually I will end up with a second one of these, but hopefully what you have in the back of your mind is that that seems like a lot of work for just adding a second thing to the screen. Okay? There must be a better way, and there is. So let's delete all that code. Anytime in a game you're thinking about having some item that appears multiple times on the screen, you want to start thinking about adding something to your game that is called a class. Now, instead of kind of explaining the idea of a class to you, I'm just going to give an example. To add a class, we're going to create a new file to our playground. And so this is what pops up when you do this, and I'm going to add in the other elements of our playground. And I'm going to name this file bubble, because I want to be able to make multiple bubbles in my game, because that's going to make it more fun. So here's how I lay out the code here. All right, so this is the bubble.swift file that I filled out, and there are a few things I want you to notice. I know this looks really complicated, and it kind of is, because there are some extra things that you have to do, but I want you to observe a lot of the things that are similar to what we had in our original file. So first off, we're defining our circle size to be a CG float, being equal to 40, and I'm doing that up top, just like I did that at the top of my my game scene in the other playground. So just switch back and forth. That circle size is right here at the top of the game scene. So that is the same. The other thing that I've done is I've actually put our code from the other page here as comments, so you can see there are a lot of similarities. So this bubble is an SK shape node, and so this is where we created score bubble equals SK shape node. That SK shape node, circle of radius, circle size, you'll also see right here. So what you have to do inside of a class is use the same opening code, we call this an initializer, in order to create something that is a shape node. So that's why this code here is the same as the code right here. But now things get a little bit different, but if you notice, there's actually a lot of similarity. So here I'm setting self.fillColor equals .yellow, the same way I used scoreBubble.fillColor is equal to .yellow. So a lot of this, instead of writing scoreBubble, which is what I used here, I use self, because what I'm creating is a bubble, and so bubble is a shape node, and so I want that shape node to have a fill color that is yellow, a physics body that has circle size there, and all of these other properties that I've used previously, the big difference being that I'm using self instead of scoreBubble. You'll notice there is one difference between this and this. Here, I'm setting the position of my bubble to be 200, 200 in my game scene. Here, I'm setting it equal to position. Now, the reason I want to do this is I would like to set the position of my bubble as an input to my function, input to my bubble initializer. So this means that I can put a bubble anywhere on the screen in my game. All I need to do is input the x and y coordinates that go with a CG point. So I've done that there. You'll notice the score bubble label. This is all the same as what we had before. So I'm just going to delete that. And let's play around with this now back in our original playground. So this has all of our code from before. I'm just going to delete that and in its place show you how this idea of the class makes things easier. Let's say that we want to make a new bubble now. All I need to do in order to do this is now type the name of my class, which is bubble, and I need to give it a position. So let's give it a position, and I'm going to make it a CG point, which has an x coordinate of, let's say, 150, and a y coordinate also of 150. Okay, and then, as before, self.addChild new bubble. And so now that we have that, let's slide this over and take a look at what this does. So just as before, this creates a bubble with the 8 inside, so it has all the properties that I had before, but now I've reduced that to be a single line like this. Now let's do something else. Let's just copy this over, and instead let's put this at 250, 150. Now you'll see that we're going to get an error because, again, I need to add something that makes this variable different. So now you can see that just by adding in a copy of that original code, I'm creating a bubble just as before, but I'm changing the x-coordinate, and now it makes that for us, no problem. Let's really mix this up. So what I did here was I created a loop, and I said for I equals 1 to 5, so I'm going to do this 5 times. I'm going to get a random x value. I'm going to get a random y value. I'm going to create a bubble at that randomized position, and then I'm going to add it. And I do that 5 times. So now, in doing that, I have created 5 bubbles and reduced the amount of code required to do that quite a bit. That's a big deal. Now, let's really have some fun. You can notice that these are kind of using up all the available space. Let's say I want to make all of those bubbles smaller. I can go back to my bubble.swift file. I can change this to instead be, let's say, 10. Now remember, because I did all of this work before to make this do what I wanted it to do in my original file, now when I make that one change in my class, this is what happens. So you notice that still all of my bubbles are shaped as expected. They're smaller. The 8 is still where I want it to be. And let's really go crazy. Let's see what happens when we increase this to a huge number. So that's definitely a little bit much, and that took a while to actually go and calculate. But you can see how you can have some fun with this. Let's put it back to something reasonable, and then play around with one other thing that we can do with this. So let's scroll down to our touches began function. So you remember that this function runs anytime you touch your game, and this line right here gets the location of that touch. So let's make it so when there is a touch on the screen, you create a new bubble at the position of that location, and then you add that new bubble to the screen. So we get the same behavior as before, but now when I click, it creates a new bubble at each location of the click. So which is pretty cool. So now I can keep adding these to the scene. Let's keep mixing this up now. Let's go back to our bubble.swift, and the same way that we were creating some random numbers here, let's create random numbers inside our class. You notice that this text right now is locked to always be 8. But what if instead we created a random label number, and we made it a number between 1 and 10? So let's try that. And now inside of this, let's put the label as the text, so that for each of the circles there, it has a different number. Let's try that out. Let's save it and then go back to our playground. All right, so that got a little crazy. Not totally sure why that happened. Getting some really big numbers. Oh, I see what it is. If you look, those are all really long decimals, so that's why they're all overlapping like that. So let's fix that one. We'll go over here, and let's put in a round function around the entire thing, so that now it's a nice, clean, round number. We'll save it and go back to the other page. Okay, and now at least it's writing it as a decimal. That's not quite what we wanted, I think. I think we may need to turn it into an integer so that it does what we had before. But you can see how this is one more way that we can have some fun with this. All right, so the last thing that I'll show you is I've played around with this. I've cleaned up those numbers, and you notice that I've made it so that every number except 7 is yellow. So I've made it so that the 7s have a special color associated with them. What I'd like you to do now is see if you can piece this together yourself and play around with it to make it your own, just as I usually do with this sort of task. And as always, let me know if you have any questions or get stuck. Have fun.